Welcome everyone to the HP Life Design Thinking webinar. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Debbie Ledbetter. I'm the HP Life Program Manager and I will be your host today. My co-host is Grace Lung. She is the Partnership and Project Manager from WorldSkills, one of our HP Life partners. So I wanted to go through just a little bit of housekeeping and more details on the HP Life Thinking webinar. So first of all, everybody is coming in on mute with no video, and we're asked you to use chat to talk to other attendees and panelists. If you're having any technical issues whatsoever, Jeff Roth will be able to help you, so you can send a message to him maybe to help with any technical issues. But with other attendees, we'd love to know more about you, and you can talk with each other with other attendees. Use the Q&A to ask questions. You can direct your questions to the panelists, and so what will happen once we get started with the webinar is we'll have a Q&A session at the end, and we'll address your questions at the end. So please send your questions, think about what questions you have, send them to the panelists, and we will get to them. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll have a link to the recorded presentation within a few days, and we'll provide that by email, and we'll have it on the HP Life website as well as the WorldSkills website. And I will be sending out slides to all the registrants after the webinar. Okay, so, and I also wanted to mention that WorldSkills is one of our HP Life partners, and they're working with me on this particular webinar and the Be Changemaker Social Entrepreneurship Contest, as well as EdCast, who is our hoster and provider for HP Life. They are graciously sponsoring this webinar as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. And I want to introduce our speaker. So I'm very, very pleased to have Gabriel I'm very pleased to have Gabriel Santa-Donato as our presenter today. Gabriel is a lecturer and fellow at the Life Design Lab at the Stanford University Design Group. Gabriel has taught design thinking at universities and corporations for many years. Today, Gabriel is going to talk about customer empathy and research, the first phase of design thinking. The skills in this phase are essential for defining the real customer problem and testing potential solutions. Gabriel, please take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie. So yeah, as Debbie noted, I'm coming to you from the Life Design Lab at Stanford University. And given that we only have an hour together today, I wanted to focus in on one particular phase, the key phase of the design thinking process, which is empathy. So if you had taken the design thinking course through HP Life, I wanted to gear you in where we are in the HP Life process. So we're in two phases according to the HP Life process. This is all about observing your audience, so being with your customers and your audience, as Debbie noted, and empathizing and exploring the problem. The reason I'm showing this slide to you now is because I'm, from here on out, going to use the Stanford Design School's process, but I just want to gear you in where we are in the HP Life Design process. In order to dive into empathy, I want to zoom out for a moment and think about where design thinking belongs in different ways of solving problems. So there are many valid ways to solve problems out in the world. And I'm going to go through step by step some of them, just so we know where design thinking belongs as a problem-solving tool. So we have engineering thinking, which is all about being able to actually solve something. This is where there is a known and net solution at the end of the road. So in order to build a bridge, at some point, X has to equal 7. We know the solution at the end of the tunnel, and so we can solve our way forward. In business thinking, it's all about optimization. So it's being able to figure out how to make the most with what you have. That's another equally valid way of thinking, optimizing your way forward. There's research thinking, which is all about having an intense curiosity, setting a hypothesis, and analyzing your way forward, also completely valid. And then we have design thinking, which is all about building your way forward. And we need to build our way forward in instances where we have no-net solution where we don't know what the next step is necessarily. So that's why design thinking is particularly useful for what we call wicked problems, which is actually in the dictionary. So wicked problems are one where we don't know what the solution is at the end of the day, and the second we take a step forward in solving our problem, the solution space might change. So design thinking is great for that because it's all about launching small experiments and getting immediate feedback from your users. I'm showing you now the design process from with human beings. So the design school was founded in 2004 by David Kelly. He founded the design school and IDEO, the company, at the exact same time, on this hunch that, hey, collecting a ton of data isn't the best way necessarily to go about solving problems. If we truly want to be innovative, we need to go to people and we need to hear their stories. So it's flipping the process to be about human beings, which is why empathy comes into play. So empathy is the first step, and that's about really understanding your user's needs, walking a mile in their shoes. Obviously, I'm going to go a little bit into that, but I wanted to do a flyover of the design thinking process in order to gear you in where we are right now. So going from empathy, which is about collecting multiple human stories, and going wider, we come back narrow to think about how we are really defining the problem. Oftentimes, when we're in the definition phase, we think, oh, I thought the problem was really about this, but it's actually about this now that I've talked to real human beings and real people. So definition is about coming up with a point of view so that we can go back wide again and come up with multiple wild and crazy ideas to potentially solve our problem. Design thinking in many ways mirrors the process of creativity, which is diverging, thinking widely, and converging, thinking narrowly, flaring, thinking widely, and focusing, thinking narrowly. So once you come up with multiple ideas, here we are in the middle, the idea is to get them back to the people as soon as possible. So that's why we prototype. We build quick and fast solutions to get them in the hands of our users so we get immediate feedback. And that's what testing is all about. Testing is really the point of the process that brings us back to the human beings to begin with. It's entirely cyclic. So though the design thinking process is often shown linearly, it's really a series of multiple circles, because the sooner you can get a solution or a potential solution, a prototype that is, in the hands of your users, the more empathy that you can gain for them, the more innovative your solution can be. And I mentioned this before, that this is really an undulating process, that to gain human stories, we actually have to go wide and talk to different people in order to get different perspectives, come down and diverge, focus to build a solution, flare very wide to come up with all of our ideas, and then focus to actually test those with people. So that's just a visual to kind of show you what I'm talking about. More important in design thinking, I believe, are the mindsets that are kind of the underbelly of the process. So once you become a design thinking practitioner and you've used the process to solve multiple challenges and work with many customers, what really happens are these underlying mindsets. It's kind of like latent behaviors that happen because you've practiced it so much. The few I want to get to mind today and really gear on today are shown here on the slide. So the first one is reframing. It's all about seeing the exact same problem or situation from a totally different perspective. So you're not changing your context, you're just changing your perspective on it. Again, that happens a lot in problem definition in the design thinking process, because you think, oh, I thought it was about this, but it's really about this. And I'm going to give you a real-life example of reframing in just a moment. Next is radical collaboration. And this is why in innovation firms and innovative companies, oftentimes teams are formed not of people from the same background or discipline and not from people in the same department, but people across departments. So your best ideas come from working with people who are drastically different from you, who have different points of view and different life experiences. That's radical collaboration. Finally, or not finally, sorry, we have mindful of process. Mindful of process is simply knowing where you are in the process. Design thinking is absolutely a process, as is your life, and it's just knowing, hey, I'm actually beginning right now. So if I'm talking to people, I'm not going to go talk to people with a solution in mind. I'm talking to people with a latent curiosity, which happens to be the fourth mindset, so that I can really listen and hear what their needs are. I don't want to get ahead of myself and think of solutions when I'm only at the beginning of my innovation process. And finally, curiosity, which I just mentioned, is about seeing the world from a beginner's eyes. We walk around every day and therefore carry around with us many, many assumptions that we don't even know of, we're not even aware of. So to see a problem with a fresh perspective is one of the most challenging things. Having a natural curiosity is kind of like you're born again, you're a newborn child and you've never seen this clicker or this flower vase for the first time. It's also as if you were an alien. You just landed on planet Earth and you're seeing everything for the first time. So challenging ourselves to always have an underlying curiosity, especially when we're trying to come up with innovative solutions to a problem, is key. So I'm going to tell you a quick design thinking story to hopefully gear this in a bit more reality for you. So at the design school, we have a class called Design for Extreme Affordability. And in 2008, a group of students went to Nepal because a lot of babies were dying just after childbirth. And flash forward to the end of the story, what you're looking at now is Embrace, a baby warmer to keep babies alive in the few hours after they're born. To go through the story, I want to start with how the team went about empathy, went about user research. So the team first went to a few hospitals and talked to a bunch of doctors. And they're like, why are all these incubators completely empty? So one of the things that they noticed by observing their situation is that a lot of incubators were going unused. Their thought was that people in rural Nepal didn't actually have the resources to have incubators in hospitals, but they saw incubators. So they're like, oh, the doctors are saying the incubators aren't good enough, maybe we have to build a better incubator. And if they had just stopped there, they wouldn't have really discovered the latent or important human needs behind the situation. So they're like, okay, that's interesting, but what is it about babies being birthed that we're missing here? Well, we're missing the stories from the mothers who are actually giving birth. So they went to rural Nepalese villages and talked to mothers one-on-one. They stayed in their homes with them. They experienced childbirth with them. And what they realized is that it wasn't about these empty incubators. It wasn't about building a more expensive or a better incubator so that would be used. It was about coming to mothers' homes and seeing that they want their babies close to them. Many mothers were too afraid to put their babies in their incubator because they wanted to keep their babies close by, physically to them. And they were in such rural areas that even getting access to a hospital and an incubator wasn't even a possibility to begin with. So by, quote unquote, walking a mile in these mothers' shoes, or really spending time understanding with them, being with them, asking them questions, sincerely listening to them, they were able to redefine the problem and open it up to how to really save as many Nepalese children as possible. With that, I now want to spend some time in what we're doing today, which is going deeper in the empathy process. So here we are in the first hexagon, the first phase of design thinking. This has come out in a few things that I've said already, but empathy is really about focusing on human needs versus the solution. So the solution, in the case of the baby warmer, Embrace, would have been, oh, create a better incubator. That's what we got to do. But when they focused on human needs, it was really about how do we keep mothers close to our children? How do we solve for mothers who can't go to hospitals? Because that was about a human need, not a solution at the end of the tunnel. If Starbucks wants more customers, like why aren't people coming to Starbucks? A better coffee or a cheaper coffee might be the solution. But that's not the solution. It's really about how might we help people wake up in the morning. That's the human need. So if coffee is a solution, the need is how do we help people get up in the morning and feel great about that? So I just want to draw a distinction between needs and solutions, because when you're focusing on empathy, it's all about needs. So how do we go about discovering human needs? Needs, again, is about kind of swimming in another person's pool, being in their world, being in their ocean, being in their home. There are a few ways to go about discovering needs. The first I'm going to share with you, which was in the design thinking course that HP Life put on, is observation, and is one of the phases in HP Life. So observation is really about standing in a process and thinking for yourself. So this is Ono, and he studied a lot of the early manufacturing lines. And what he would do with his team to figure out how to make manufacturing better is simply go to a manufacturing plant, stand there silently for hours, and just watch and see what he sees, thinks what he thinks. So observation is, again, about standing in the process and thinking for yourself. So here are some ways to go about doing that. When you're observing people, when you're observing your customers, your users, you want to think about these three things: what, how, and why. What is about what exactly is this person or people doing. So you're going to notice what's happening both with the individual who you might be observing and the context, the container that he or she is functioning within. How are they doing it? So you see what it is. What is exactly what you observe with your own two eyes? How is, okay, how exactly are they going about doing it? And a good way to think about how is, pretend you're describing this to a friend who hasn't been in this situation before. How are they moving the pieces in the manufacturing joint? How is the mother holding her child when she first comes out of the womb? And then why? Why is when we get a little bit to hunches, our own hunches and our own biases. So what and how should be basic observations. This shouldn't be clouded by your own assumptions. Why is when you kind of bring your own intelligence and perspective into the game. So why are they doing this way? Take a guess. Think about what their story is. And then that might give you a place to ask follow-up questions to them. So observation is about standing, looking, what, how, and why. But sometimes we're not lucky enough to go to the Nepalese village, rural villages, and be with the people and be with the customers all the time who we want to be with. So there's some clever ways to actually sneak up on observation. One is doing a personal inventory. So oftentimes people carry around a backpack, a bag, a purse with them, a wallet even. It is amazing how much you can learn about your customer or user by asking them to essentially give you a tour of their bag. So personal inventory is a great way to learn more about someone. Now, those can be tailored to a specific problem that you're trying to solve. Another great way is having or using camera journals. So to actually give a customer or give a user a camera or a video capturing device that they can take along and capture their day for you, capture their experience waiting in line at the coffee shop, capture their experience waking up in the morning. So personal inventories and camera journals are two great ways, again, to kind of sneak up on observation when you can't go live in the village for a week with someone. Another key piece of empathy that I want to dive a little bit deeper into is design interviewing. So design interviewing is in many ways the crux of empathy. It's how to listen, it's how to be with someone and ask them questions in a way that gets at human stories. So there are a few different ways to go about design interviewing. Oftentimes in the design school at Stanford, we throw our students out on the street and we're just grab anyone that passes by and ask them questions. That doesn't give you a ton of time to prepare questions, to have an interview plan, but those are called flybys. It's getting unbiased, quick user research on the street. Another way to get information is a more structured interview. Again, this gives you time for prepared. You can reach out to users or customers in advance and have them sit with you for a period of time and really go methodically through some questions and gain some stories from them that you're interested in. A third way is actually having a participatory interview. This is super interesting because it's kind of when observation and interviewing come together. You actually get to have that experience with a customer or with a user. You ask them to invite you into their world, and you get all the information with them. You get that experience with them. So not only are you able to listen for information and build off their cues, you're mirroring their body language and learning that from your own self. When you're doing all these three kinds of interviews, the real goal is to go for meaning. So in life, we kind of have three levels of conversation. We have the explicit, so what we see every day. This is when I pass someone on the street or I get to work in the morning. Someone asks me, how are you? How's the weather? And I'm like, I'm doing okay, and I wish it would stop raining in San Francisco. That's great. That's usually what we see in people. Often with people we know, we get to the implicit layer. We get a little context. We know a little bit about their family, where they're from, so on and so forth. But what we're really going for in design interviewing, where real insight and innovation comes from, is meaning. And we access meaning, as I said, through human stories and particular details in human stories. So next I'm going to share with you a few tips on how to get to that meaning layer. As I said, the first tip is to go for stories. And this might seem basic, but a really good way to cue for a story is, tell me about a time when. Oftentimes, we ask people very general questions like, do you like this? Do you like coffee? What was it like giving birth to your first child? That's hard for a user or customer to answer. You want to ask them to tell about a very specific moment. Tell me about a moment this week when you, so on and so forth, and insert whatever you want to learn about there. In stories, we want to unearth details. Details are where we find insights and meaning. So in order to go for details, we essentially try this technique we call the why ladder. Say more about that. Why? Why? Because what you're really going for is human emotion. In stories, and in details embedded in stories, is real human need and emotion. Sometimes that comes out directly in a story, and sometimes that's in their body language. It's in their eyes. It's how they pause and think when they're answering your question. In design interviewing, you should really only be talking 10% of the time and listening 90% of the time. As human beings, we kind of are afraid of silence. And in design interviewing, we can't be afraid of silence. We have to lay a question out there and let it sit with our user and see how they respond. We also want to avoid open-ended questions. We want to avoid yes or no questions, because yes or no questions we could Google on the internet. Open-ended questions are where insight comes from. So again, those are a few tips. If you do nothing else, ask them to tell you about a time and say more about something, because that's going to give you the details in the stories where insights are. So if you're so lucky to have a structured interview, you might want to prepare some questions in advance. Here I've drawn out what a basic interview arc should look like. The first thing is that when you're talking to customers and users, you can't forget that you're dealing with human beings. And your project might be on internet use in homes, it might be on childbirth, and it might be on coffee. But either way, these are humans with real stories, and you have to develop rapport. So you have to bring them into a zone of psychological safety and comfort if they're going to share stories with real needs in them. So the first thing is always to develop rapport. Then you want to follow up with some of those open-ended questions you might have prepared for in advance. Drill those down into specific stories. From those specific stories, ask why to garner some feelings and beliefs. And always take a moment of pause to revisit something interesting they said. This is where having someone else at the interview with you is hugely helpful, because it's very hard to attend to someone, to take notes, to pull out those interesting nuggets and revisit those as one person. And very important at the end, because there is always a lot going on in a conversation, is to ask, is there anything we missed? And let your user, let your customer fill in those gaps for you. of course, at the other end of developing rapport is saying thank you for their time. So thinking about this arc, if you are going into an interview, the best way to prepare is to think of 2 or 3 starter questions, some of those open-ended questions, and then list some general themes that you want to make sure you're going to touch on. Because if we're too strict in our questions in our interview coming in, it feels like an interrogation and not a conversation. And where insight and innovation comes from is letting things bubble up, letting themes emerge. So that's why we only suggest making kind of 2 or 3 starter questions and some general themes. And as I mentioned, I just want to emphasize, if you're so lucky to have a team to be working on a project with, you want to assign roles in that. A lead interviewer, so the person actually asking the initial questions, a secondary interviewer who's listening and kind of picking up on things that might be left off or thinking of follow-up questions, and a note taker, someone who's capturing. All designers are always capturing, so you want to make sure you have stories to capture so that when it comes time to kind of meet back at Basecamp and define the problem, you have stories to go off of. When you're following on an interview, so let's say you get the chance to talk to someone for 30 minutes, and you're so lucky to have a moment to spend with your team and ask follow-up questions after, or you go to someone else in the same coffee shop and ask follow-up questions later. You go to another home with Nepalese women and you're able to ask follow-up questions. You're going to learn from your interview, and you want to reflect on, after that first interview, a few things. One is, what was most surprising to you? What really struck you when someone said that? Secondly, what are you still curious about? Like, you twitched your face when you were talking about that. Can you tell me more about that? So what still strikes your curiosity? And then finally, I wonder if this means. This is a super key phrase, because that's, again, going from your direct observations, the direct stories, to any insights. I wonder if this means. And you can ask questions to drill a little bit deeper if you're so lucky, again, to talk to your user a second time or another user, following up with another user. One of the most interesting part of empathies is kind of going back and being able to capture and share stories. So this is an empathy board that we often use, where we're able to collect data. And when we say data, this is just nuggets of things that we observed in different locations that we've done empathy and people we've spoken to. So on the surface, when you're sharing all your empathy stories with a team, you want to think about capturing things people say. So if you're thinking, okay, everyone's around a board and everyone has a Post-it and a Sharpie, we always say one idea per Post-it. So you might capture some key quotations you heard when you were doing your design interview, or if you were observing and just listening and you overheard something someone said. So that would go in the upper left-hand quadrant and say. And what's great about these is you can capture this and create your own kind of 2x2 for say, do, think, and feel anywhere. And then there's do, and a lot of this comes from observation and body language that people use when you're interviewing them. So capturing things that people actually did. Well, it seems like she bent over to get that. I think that's too far away for her to reach. Those sort of things. So those are things people have said, things people have done from your interviews and your observations. And then on the other side is what comes from what people say. So behind what people say are what people are possibly thinking. So that takes a little bit of a leap of faith and some inference to go to what people say to what people think. So you capture in a few Post-its, well, I think she was thinking, so on and so forth. It also takes some inference to go from what people do to what you believe then people feel. They might have directly told you what you feel, which is why when you're doing a design interview, well, that should come out. So they might have already told you what they think and feel, and you can capture that directly. But know that you can also make inferences. Well, because this person was doing this or saying this, I actually think they're really feeling this. This board is a great way to capture stories and think about key areas that you want to zone in on for your problem definition. So when you're looking here, you can figure out what exactly is it that's most interesting to our team. If something is repeating itself in the say, do, think, and feel category, That's always a good sign. That means that there's something there, there's some juice there. Or if there's a tension, they said this, but they did this, and those are in contradiction with one another. Tensions are great places where innovation is also found. Or if there's a surprise. I can't believe she said she thinks this. I was never expecting that. That's another great place to hone in on. So when we're thinking about capturing stories and going from empathy to define, it's all about, as I've said a few times, taking this leap of faith. We have what we observe, the empty incubator, the mother not wanting to let go of her child. And then we have to make some inferences. We have to ask ourselves, I wonder if this means. So empathy is about what you see with your eyes, the reality that's happening around you with the world, and immersing in that. Defining a problem that's worth coming up with ideas with, and defining the right problem is where you as a designer come into play. It's where your own personal biases actually come into play, into making an inference. So now that we've kind of gone over empathy in both a high level and somewhat deep way, I want to forecast what would come next in the design thinking process. We're all back at Basecamp. We've shared our stories. We've highlighted some ones that are particularly surprising or full of tension or have a lot of meat and juice behind them, something that really is deep and interesting to our team. That's when we go into problem definition. And in the define phase, what we're really focusing on is realizing new insights, so things we didn't even think existed before, things that we unearthed in our conversations with human beings and our observations. We're also focusing on one challenge. This can be particularly tricky for folks because you've heard all of these stories and now comes the time to narrow in on one particular challenge. Here's where the design thinking process is forgiving. The second you have focused on a challenge and tested that idea from that challenge with the user, you'll know if you're on the right track or not, and you'll know if you have to redefine your point of view and your problem. But for now, in the define phase, it's important to focus on one challenge. And as I said, defining is about crafting a point of view. So putting a stake in the ground so that you have a sturdy place and a discrete place for which to come up with all of your ideas from. So how do you actually craft a point of view? So there are many, many Mad Libs in which to craft a point of view. I put some key ones in here. This is where sometimes when we share all of our stories, we get into problem definition. It's very easy to think about the one mother we talked to or the one tired person who needs a coffee we're hearing from. So it's important in developing a point of view statement to revisit your original users and actually choose someone who you're going to focus on. So we met Linda, we met Daniel, we met Miguel, a 19-year-old, a 65-year-old. So you give some description of this person who you met. Sometimes we create a composite user because we met 5 Nepalese women and they share similar characteristics. They're in rural villages. They don't have access to incubators. They barely even have access to hospitals or healthcare. So we need the care to come to them. So we might create a composite user of a few different people we have met. But the best way to do that is actually to gear them in one human being, to create one person out of them. So we met so-and-so. We were surprised to notice. This is what struck you. This is what surprised you. This is the tension that you observed. So we were surprised to notice that they didn't even know about the incubators in the hospital. We didn't even know those existed. We wonder if this means. So this is where you articulate your leap of faith. You articulate your hunch. We wonder if this means that it's an issue of access and closeness, not an issue of building a better incubator. So it would be game-changing to save as many lives by bringing care to the women. In the it would be game-changing too, it's really easy to slip into a place of solutions. So I would want to put, oh, it would be game-changing to build in-house incubators. This is not where you want to come up with a new solution. This is where you want to craft an inspired challenge for yourself, kind of an open-ended place in which to design. So that's one example of a point of view statement. The D-School has many resources that you can use to actually craft point of views by where to come up with ideas from. So here we are back with our Nepalese women. And if we crafted a point of view, the next step in the design thinking process is to actually change that point of view into a how might we statement. A how might we statement is taking a point of view and putting it in to an area of opportunity for design. So if we think about the story of these Nepalese women and their children, our how might we statement might look something like this. How might we help Nepalese children born in the countryside gaining fighting chance to survive their earliest days of life? I'll say that again. How might we help Nepalese children born in the countryside gain a fighting chance to survive their earliest days of life? So if I asked that how might we question to all of you, and you all had a Post-it pad and a paper, we could easily jump into ideation. We could all think of many ideas that would serve these women and have their children get a better chance at life in those first few days. The Embrace Baby Warmer is what this team actually came up with. So it used like very special conductive properties to actually keep the baby warm within this somewhat sleeping bag-like sack that you're hearing here. And it's brought right to the child so that it's actually serving as an incubator that you can hold. This was started in 2008, and after many, many failures, the team has saved over 200,000 Nepalese children's lives, which is quite incredible. So I want you to know that you're not alone on your journey. There are many, many tools if you are particularly interested in diving into the field of empathy. There are probes that you can use with your customers and consumers to get data on them. There's more information on how you do things like bag inventories and camera journals and all the things that I mentioned today. So we're lucky in that just a few days ago, the D-School launched a new website, and at this link here, they've collated all of their resources. So you can go in and kind of have a heyday of all the different resources that the D-School has available. HP Life also has a slew of resources like the design thinking course that they just offered, and many more that you can use to explore to think about how to better understand customer and consumer needs. So I'm going to pause for a moment. We're at about 11:40, which is a little earlier than anticipated, and just see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Gabrielle. This is Grace from WorldSkills International. Just like to thank you for such an excellent presentation. I do have a few questions from our audience. So the first one is, could you give us some suggestions what people could do when they cannot directly interview the end users? Could this be using some kind of data or observations or other inputs? Maybe you have some previous examples that could share with us.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, I think what I was actually just saying is a great way. If you don't have access to your end users, you can do the best you can, right? So you could possibly send them a camera to do a camera journal. You could have them actually write a journal for you and record some of their daily habits. You can have them send you pictures of things like their bag, their day, whatever it is you're innovating on. And I see actually a question in the chat about how design thinking and traditional quantitative research coexist, and they're actually hugely complementary. So when you're doing this research, there's nothing to say that market research is your enemy or data that you can find on the internet or with other survey tools is your enemy. It's actually hugely complementary. So you can collect stories through data, and that is more qualitative research. And then you also can put that up against numbers and hard science and see where those kind of connect and disconnect. Because again, tensions, contradictions, surprises, those are ripe areas for design. And you can find a tension not only among stories or between stories, but let's say between a human story and a piece of data that we might hold true in society. So that's a great tension to explore too. Does that make sense?
Yes, Gabrielle, I think these are very good examples that you just shared. I'd like to move on to the next question. There's another question coming from the participant, which was asking about what is the difference between ideate and divergence. He gave an example about in Google Design Sprints, they have divergent instead of ideate. So what is the difference?
The difference is that everyone wants to do design thinking, and so they're naming it how they like to.
Okay.
But let me go. So diverging is just the process of going wide, and ideating is also the process of going wide. In ideating, the key idea is to kind of unhinge and come up with as many solutions as possible. In brainstorming, we hold our own assumptions and we censor ourselves. So the second that we have our wild idea, our kind of unspoken brain hinges it back in and makes it feasible. And the idea of divergence is to actually go past that, to go so wide, because the father of brainstorming basically did research on this and talks about how your best ideas come when you have your most ideas. So divergence is about going wide, and ideate is about having as many ideas as humanly possible.
That sounds good. There's another question regarding the really nice story that you just shared about baby incubator in Nepal. Could you give us maybe an example of one of the challenges that the team who has worked on the issue of baby incubator, maybe during that interviewing stage, and what did they do to resolve it?
Yeah, they face a lot of challenges. One is the differing opinions of doctors and mothers, right? So sometimes we have multiple stakeholders who we're solving for, and they're going to have different stories. Once they were able to build the first prototype of the baby warmer, they went back to the doctors and they realized they were solving a new problem, which was one of communication. How to essentially convince the doctors and bring them on their side so that they can communicate and support the baby warmer. So when they were in that process, they weren't getting doctors on board, and without doctors on board, the baby warmer would cease to be. So they actually had to find a way to bring the two worlds of rural Nepalese mothers and doctors in these hospitals together. That was a huge challenge they faced, and it took many, many trips out there to actually resolve that. And what's particularly interesting about the baby warmer embrace, is what it's called, is the kind of layers of needs that they uncovered. So first it was, okay, incubators are unused. Interesting. I wonder why that is. Okay, we talked to the mothers. We realized that is because they can't access them and they want their children close to them physically. They don't trust them and they can't even get to the hospital. Once we solve for that, now we actually have to solve for, okay, how do we make these accessible and get these out there? We need to create buy-in and get the doctors on board with this. So there's a kind of a whole slew of challenges that existed in going from one thing to the next, and really keeping the team on their toes about what needs they're solving for, when, and for who.
That's great to know. I think that also gave our participants, a bit of what they might expect during that kind of process. I think I would like to ask the last question. What are the typical or the most common challenges when it comes to develop empathy?
So there are a few. One is that these are human beings that you're dealing with, and so they have all sorts of ideas and behaviors, and you can't control for that. So when you're going out to do user research, it's often about being respectful and being understanding of the idea that you're digging into someone's life, and which is hugely important to do if you want to actually create something useful and usable out in the world, and also takes a great deal of sensitivity. So developing rapport, I think, is one of the most important things when you're doing a design interview. And that's as simple as saying, like, I'm from HP, I'm from here, I'm from this, I'm working on this project. Would you mind if I took a little bit of your time to put questions? Is it okay if I record you? Thinking of the basic courtesies in general human interaction is really key in design interviewing and even observation too. I think one of the greatest challenges is that people think they're being used or they're not part of the process. Oftentimes, a really nice thing to do is if you are involving anyone in your interview process is to actually circle back to them with an outcome report. Where did their stories lead? How did that go? So you're really kind of doing them well as a human being, doing good by them, and involving them in your whole design thinking process, not just your empathy.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I think given our time, that's all the questions we can answer right now. I would like to give the floor back to Debbie.
Great, thanks, Gabrielle, and thanks, Grace, so much for that. And I guess, one thing, Gabrielle, just want to maybe point out as well is that, the initial interview and the initial ideation, you're able to then go back with your prototypes and go back to that initial audience and be able to ask them further questions. And that's where further learning happens, because you may not have quite got everything at the very beginning. Absolutely. And you've designed something, and then you'll further observe, further understand what their needs are. So if there's anything additional you'd like to add on that part, that would be great.
Absolutely. So I'm going to quickly pull up I'm going to take a guess on where we are here. Yeah. So we talked about the first few phases, the empathy and getting to define, and in the questions kind of got at what does it mean to really come up with lots of ideas to diverge and to ideate. And as Debbie just said, the whole point of ideating is to create action, to create something that someone could taste or touch or feel or experience as a way of gaining more empathy for them. So creating a prototype or multiple prototypes out of one or multiple of your ideas is simply a way to put the power back into the hands of your users and to understand needs further. So observation will get you so far, asking questions will get you so far, but actually giving your solution to someone, giving this kind of mini sleeping bag to a mother with her child in it and asking her to talk about it, asking her to react to it, is another brilliant way of gaining more information and more stories from that person. Because then they have something to push against. They have something to give you feedback on. They have something to react to. So creating a quick and a dirty mock-up, and prototypes look like all sorts of things. They can be a physical prototype, so look and feel prototype. So creating out of cardboard, something that we create physically. They could be a storyboard, so you're bringing something through a story. They could be a business model canvas. They could be a role play, so long as it is something to enroll your user into your experience so that they can give you direct and honest feedback and react to it. And exactly what you said, Debbie, that's just another way of gaining even further empathy for them because they have something physical and real to react to.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you so much for everybody for attending. Thanks, Gabrielle, for an excellent presentation. This is really awesome. I just want to let everybody know that we do have a design thinking course on HP Live, so hopefully all of you have taken that course, and we have a design thinking discussion forum. So if you would like to meet me out in the design thinking discussion forum to further the conversation on design thinking, I would welcome you there. And as Gabrielle also mentioned, we do have next step resources on design thinking to really help you dive deeper in design thinking. As well as we have a couple of upcoming HP Life webinars, so please register. We have one crowdfunding coming up with Kiva and Grow and Scale Your Business with FounderScope, so I hope that everybody can attend those. And then lastly, I just want to mention Be Changemaker. It is our social entrepreneurship project, HP Life as well as WorldSkills. The deadline to join that is March 9th, and it really talks about how do you solve for social issues, how do you ideate, prototype, and build a business plan. So if you would like to join, there is a URL there available for you. And then if you have any questions, please send them to me. But at this point, we would like to close the webinar. But thanks, everyone, for attending. I hope we'll continue the conversation.
Thanks so much, Debbie.
Thank you.